Okay, folks, for the sake of brevity, I'm going to try and just show you all a few examples of what you're hoping to achieve in Project 3. But really, it's more about looking at the examples given and trying to replicate that. But in order to do that, I think consciously, we want to talk about a couple different terms that sort of describe sort of what's going on. Before we do that, let's again quickly recap Project 1 and 2 and talk about those key kind of terms. So in Project 1, dealing with relativity of color, we learned about this examples of figure-ground relationships. Here we have two examples of that. This is a figure on top of the ground, same here. Now, what we sort of learn about color here is that color is very relative and can be very influenced by the ground it's on. So here, this figure, which is the same shade of green in both, appears very differently depending on the ground it's on. So what we learned here is how do we take one color and make it appear as two? And so what we learned about in this one is, for example, while this figure does feel very different on these much cooler toned grounds compared to this much warmer zone, what we learned about value in Project 2 is that I bet we could make these grounds much, much darker shades of green and blue, and then this figure would appear a lot lighter compared to this figure over here. Now, this is Project 3, and as we look at these examples, which you're essentially going to be recreating for homework, we'll start to think about what's going on here between the figure and the ground, and what is it about these designs that becomes that is pretty intelligent. And we'll sort of explain what's going on a bit in a minute, but I want to just show you all a few examples because I have a feeling you all will understand quite well what's going on just on your own. And feel free to pause as needed to focus on these a bit. Okay, I'm going to send you all the PDF about your about the expectations for your homework assignment, but I just wanted to show you all this just in case you don't, just in case you have any questions. This is basically about how I'm grading the projects. I'm going to set up Google Drive folders for these projects as well that you can submit to, and I want you all to name them this way so that I can locate them easily. Now, I'll be grading based on three factors. The first is formatting. Have you made a screenshot of the single composition? And have you used large grounds and small figures? We now know that that's how you get the real visual effect when those small figures are really isolated on those larger grounds. Secondly, does your color really demonstrate your understanding of the relativity that's happening in this project? And three, is your design interesting? Have you been inspired by the example but then made it your own? And if you're still unsure about how to make the screenshot, I'm going to make a separate video on that I'll put on YouTube. Here's the Project 3 description. You're going to be making 7 different compositions based on 3 different styles, and we'll look at those in 1 second. You're going to make 2 compositions, 2 individual screenshotted compositions based on the first style, 2 on the second style, and 3 on the third style, which deals with complementary colors and is the most complicated. So again, you're going to have 7 final compositions or 7 JPEGs that you're going to submit. Now, this is that first example we looked at in the slideshow before, and this kind of introduces our kind of essential question, which we get to ask for this next project. What is that question? In terms of the figure-ground relationship, we now get to ask, which color will play simultaneously the roles of the 2 colors of the 2 reciprocal grounds? Otherwise, you could also say, what color does this figure need to be so that it appears from here as this ground and from the right side here as the left ground? That's what's going on here. But because we know about the kind of trickery that goes on with color relativity, you've probably guessed that these figures are one color, and these grounds are two colors, clearly. So we're working with three colors here, but they appear as the same two. So that's kind of a challenge. So for your first section of your homework, you're going to create two compositions. This would be one composition, this green one, and this pink one would be another composition. So you're going to create two compositions of your own, just like this. The second part, you'll create two compositions based on this. It's the exact same idea, except instead of using a monochromatic or single color scheme, you're going to be using three different colors. But again, the idea is that the ground here, the figure here and the figure here are the same, but this one appears as the opposing background here, and this one appears as the opposing ground here. Now you could argue it doesn't, but you get the idea, right? It's getting close to this. And this is the third example, which is the most exciting, and I love this transition here where you really get to see all these, these three colors in action together, and you can really tell right in this moment that they are totally different. But when you get really isolated over here, you can see how this line or this figure feels a lot like the ground here, and this line of the figure here feels a lot like this pinky ground over here. And don't you just love this design, how there's this tension here and there's this thin kind of X pattern going on? So that's an example of a striking figure-ground relationship where the figure appears as the opposing ground on both sides while using complementary colors. Again, I know we've said we're not going to get too deep into theory, but if you look at the color wheel in terms of, and you look at secondary colors, right, which are colors mixed from your primary colors, red, green, and blue. I'm sorry, red, yellow, and blue. We'll look more color theory later on. Basically, complementary colors are colors that are opposite each other on the color wheel. So just Google color wheel and you'll see what I mean. Okay, so how do we do this? I'm not going to tell you exactly how to do it, but I'm going to say a little bit about how to think about this stuff because I want you all to really figure it out. Basically, what we're having to sort out is how to achieve this middle color that simultaneously kind of references this ground as well as this ground. It kind of exists somewhere in between. What we found out in Project 1, and this is one of your submitted pieces, is that the figure is either close to or far away from the ground somehow. And we now know about hue and we know about value, right? We know about color and we know that color can be either light or dark. So if you adjust those two different levels, if you adjust the color and you adjust the value, you get either close to or far away from that ground. And there's some crazy relationships going on here. I don't know which one is closer. I guess it's this warm side. Although in terms of value, these seem a bit closer. In this example, it's definitely closer to the ground here being the green and blue because it's all cool and a similar value than here. And we bring up this idea about this middle color because in order to find that middle color for your homework assignment, especially in the first style you're going to work on, where you work from a monochromatic position and find this figure color here that mimics the two opposing grounds. To do that, you want to take your middle color or the figure and you want to adjust the two grounds, moving them either further away or closer to that middle one. So in this example, if we didn't like what was going on, say this pink was way too dark and it wasn't nearly close enough to the figure here, well, we might lighten it. Then again, if this was way too light and wasn't close enough to that figure there, even though these are the same, then we might darken it. That seems quite clear. When you get into a non-monochromatic color scheme like this tan and green, it gets a bit more exciting and a bit more complex, right? And that's the fun part. So you'll create two examples of this. And this is also a nice design. It becomes kind of, starts to vibrate. There's a bit more energy in this pattern. This is closer to, well, this is an example of a complementary color scheme as well. This will be your third style you'll work on. Yellow and purple are complementary. And this is the last slide for project 3. This is kind of a recipe, if you will, about how to do this. And if you understand color, and especially because you're getting to work with this color palette in Microsoft Excel or Google Sheets, you can really see how the colors are all kind of next to each other. If you understand color and you understand and you understand value, you can start to think about the relationship of all these different colors. And when that happens, you're going to be that much better at design. All right, thank you so much, and stay tuned for Project 4 details.